All right, well, this is Aaron Squire coming to you guys again, episode 30. And man, have we had a week in the Hex community, let me tell you. Tonight, we've got Hex Colin on, one of the pillars of our community, one of the producers in the community, the people that have basically put $10,000 on the game. And he's also done just so much for the community. We just can't talk about him too much. There's just so much that he's done for us. Then we're going to talk about the patch notes. We're going to talk about the recent lawsuit of Hex LLC versus Magic the Gathering, along with, I believe what's the company? It's I just lost
Hasbro.
it. Hasbro. Thank you. And then we're gonna go over a deck doctor where we're gonna do a Shin'hare sacrifice deck that Irish Batusi sent me again. So just so you guys know, anyone can send me a deck, and I will deck doctor it on my show. And if you need it really, really quickly, I can turn it around and get it back to you if there's a tournament or something coming up. Although we're kind of stagnant on tournaments due to the trading in game not being implemented just yet. So let's just lead this right off and talk to Hex Colin there. So Hex Colin, I guess I guess I'll just call you Colin. What kind of TCG experience do you have before Hex?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So I had started in probably '93, back when Magic was just in beta, and then revised. So I mean limited.
So you have
revised.
your
Sorry.
Power 9 then, huh?
Yeah. Well, I did. So interestingly, like way back, I had two play sets of them, but when I moved to the state, and when I was doing it, I was still in college in Glasgow, Scotland,
Right.
and I was lucky in that Wizards of the Coast UK was actually based in Glasgow at the time, so like I knew all of the guys, and they were getting cards like quicker than we could get them normally, and so I got in really quite early. But when I moved to the States, I actually sold my Power 9 to buy my first car, so I
Oh,
don't
well,
have
there
them
you go.
anymore.
Yeah,
But
well, yeah. Back then, it was probably only worth what, like $1,200, somewhere
yeah,
around there. Yeah.
maybe a bit more, but yeah, it was
Yeah.
definitely
I remember
yeah.
I remember looking at those prices, and the Black Lotus used to be $400, and now it's what? That's at least 1,500 to 2 grand by itself, somewhere in there.
Right, for a not very good condition one. So
Yeah. So how'd you find Hex? Like what like tipped you off to find Hex?
sure. I just happened to be like it was on one of my buddies. Like they posted it on Facebook. Like maybe the second day
Right.
of the Kickstarter, and it literally took. I mean, so even just like the first few words, like basically like a good version of like an online trading card game had me sold. But then I was like 2 minutes into the video, and I think like most people. Like especially because I'm probably around Corey's age too, right? Like I could just completely relate
Right.
to his story and why he was doing it and the sort of gap in his gaming life, right? And so I felt the same way.
Right.
So I like literally within like 2 minutes of starting the video, I'd like backed at Dragon Lord, and then I'd been thinking, oh, eventually I might do the producer thing, and then I was on a plane on the way to from London to Singapore actually, and I just decided to up my pledge. So
Sure, sure. And I know, yeah, you have multiple pledges for the rest of your family as well, too. So
yeah, I
yeah,
do.
yeah, myself, and Corey. Of course, I'm a bit younger than you guys, a little bit more spry, I guess. But we're all fathers, so we understand that it's tough. It's tough to get out to the hobby shops, and it's a lot of fun to still get out there and play with people. But when you got kids, it's really difficult to do that, and you still kind of want to play. So it's just really a good thing.
Right, absolutely. And even now, like even since tournaments are live, I find myself playing like later at night when the kids are in bed and whatnot, and get a draft or two in. So it's already working out really well. So
So you also do some content for Hex, like you're also a content producer. So talk to me about that a little bit.
yeah, so it's I mean I had plans to do a bit more than I've actually done at the moment, but mainly because my company went public and it's been crazier than I ever thought it would be. But yeah, we're starting a PvP team function, and Neo and Jax and Guire and a few others, and so I think we're going to be doing content related to that. So our drafting and talking about drafting strategy and
Right.
those sorts of things, and then eventually PVE too. So I think end up encompassing much of what you can do in Hex. So
That makes me think, I need to have Guer on the show. I mean, I knew it's one of the first people I met from the community, really. So yeah, he's a great guy. He really is.
yeah, and so I think that he likes trolling the forums a little too much sometimes. So
Perhaps.
I don't think people realize that they shouldn't really take him very seriously most of the time.
Right.
So
Yeah, I remember there was one in particular where he was talking about Disney songs or something, and
yeah.
yeah, it's good times. Good times. So as a producer, you actually get to produce a PVE dungeon in the future. So do you have any ideas, or what can we expect from your PVE dungeon?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that it'll probably be against a villain who when you first encounter him is not in his final form, and then when you sort of work your way through the dungeon and beat sort of successive bosses, you'll come across him again, and there'll be a big reveal.
Right.
And he'll be significantly different than he was the first time you bumped into him.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting, right? I mean, I've always had a sort of a storyline in mind, but not really sort of what the encounters might be, because I didn't know what sort of tech that the Hex folks were going to be putting into, what sort of things we could do sort of out of the ordinary compared to regular games. And so I think they're starting to make, those sorts of decisions now and sort of finalising those sorts of things. And so it's some of the things they're doing, to make sure that they can give, bosses powerful cards, but still, sort of keep the power level even, sort of if those cards were outside of the dungeon for any reason,
Right.
then it's interesting. And I think there's going to be all sorts of environmental effects and sort
Like
of
global effects, yeah.
right, exactly, that allow them to rein in potentially certain cards that would break a particular dungeon, for instance, right? So that
Sure.
They don't necessarily have to worry a great deal about always making design decisions based on what they've done for all of the PvE content. So
Right.
it's hard to talk about it specifically, right? Because,
Right, yeah, you spent a
clearly-
lot of time over there, as I understand it, right? And you were
Yeah.
just talking to me before we were coming on about PVE Experience. We've seen the reveal for some of the Kraken where it's stealing cards, and you were talking to me about that experience. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, so I played all 6 encounters of Kraken's Gold on paper, which was really, really challenging because I was playing a Sapphire Diamond Set 1, Set 2 Inspire Humans deck, and so there were all sorts of Inspire triggers going off, like more than you
Lots
can get at the
keep
moment.
track of, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then worse than that, my champion was the mage, and one of the mage's later powers, basically does something to your deck every time you draw a card.
Right.
And so keeping track of that, and actually I had someone sitting beside me reshuffling my deck almost constantly because they had to they had to keep modifying my cards while I was playing. Right. So that was really interesting. But then just
They
the
were
tentacles.
The
Exactly. And then the tentacles that have already been spoiled are really, really interesting, right? Because they're
Right.
8/8 and they don't actually do any damage. They steal cards, and you have to deal with them relatively quickly, or risk losing cards at least until another time in the dungeon. So it's really, really cool, actually. Like, some of the it's clearly still a trading card game, and you're still using all the same gameplay you're learning from playing Proving Grounds matches and playing drafts and whatnot, but it's definitely a step up, right? There's so many other things you're trying to think about, and so many different strategies you have to worry about, and you're having to create a deck that works against 6 completely different decks. And then finally there was
you don't
actually
get to switch
a point.
then. You don't get to switch.
Right? Yeah, you don't get to switch.
Oh,
right?
wow.
You've only got
that's
new. Yep, you've only got 3 lives, and what the interesting thing is, there are things that are happening during the dungeon that are sort of cumulative over time.
Right.
And
Taking their
there was
toll.
actually a point where I had to I realized that I had to make a decision about whether or not I actually wanted to win a particular fight. I think I could probably have won. I could have pushed my position and gotten through the encounter, but because of what had happened during the encounter, I wasn't sure whether or not it was actually worth winning, and so my decision was to actually take a loss, regroup, and come back and
Right.
try and win the fight in a cleaner, different way, so that I could move on in a better spot for the rest of the dungeon. So it's really interesting, and it's a whole other level of gameplay and
Tactics.
tactics, and having to think through it. And it's not, and then the other thing is, there's other win conditions, right? Maybe not necessarily for you, or actually there are for you too, but there's other win conditions for some of the bosses too, right? They don't all involve doing 20 points of damage or doing however many points of damage the encounter has. So it's really interesting, and
they've talked about these alternate win conditions being out there. They just haven't told us what they are.
Right.
Right.
So Kraken's Gold is a really good example of like there being at least like 2 different win conditions on the the boss's side, as it were, and then even the final encounter being definitely different than your sort of standard match.
Right. So I guess one final question. You got to play the very first game of Hex with Corey, like in front of the community. Like, what was that like for you?
It was actually really, really stressful because
I believe it.
because so I'd had the client for about 6 days at that point, but like I'd literally gotten a huge update every day.
Yeah.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, and I'd been practicing with a given deck, and just before we realized there was a problem with one of the cards, and I had to switch to one of the pre-built decks.
That you weren't.
And so, and then worse than that, Corey literally got like perfectly curved god draws in both games, and I made one mistake, but it wouldn't actually have mattered given the cards he had, and like he was like behind the scenes, like he was like sending me notes saying, "I'm so sorry, you're so screwed." And so it was really interesting, but it was kind of cool. I also got to play the first game at Gen Con too, so it was it was kind of it's been an interesting ride. I've sort of been glad that my work travel takes me to Southern California every couple of weeks, so it's been good to sort of see the process.
All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about some of the patch notes briefly, and then we're going to talk about the court actions. The patch notes. So you guys are going to see this wonderful thing in the top left corner. It's there to be kind of humorous. It's basically a brick break program that I've been working on with Hobby Game Dev, which is Chris DeLeon has this Hobby Game Dev program. It's actually running by itself because I actually have programmed an AI for it, so you'll see it go as we're doing it. I think it's kind of funny. It'll probably be on for just this episode, so that's what that is. So with the patch notes, there's just a couple of things. We had some optimization fixes. We also had some bug exploit fixes. We know that there was problems with like the Ruby gem and some other things. More importantly, there's the pheromones bug now. So if your opponent plays pheromones, which they have to play during their first main phase before they attack to get it to work properly, you have to block with all your creatures, right? Well, you can not block with your creatures, but if you choose not to block with all your creatures, you will cause an error and lose the game. So don't do that. And then there were some various visual bugs where it is that you're getting booster packs and they're not showing up properly. You have to log out and log back in. So, Colin, anything to add to that, really?
No, not really. So it's been interesting, like, sort of, like, finding out, like, behind the scenes what was causing, like, the tournament lag, because of, like, like the number of messages they were sending to, like, every client every time. And so they've done a lot of, like, streamlining to that, and I think you can definitely tell, and the way the performance has improved even over the last couple of weeks. Right.
So moving on to Hex versus Magic the Gathering. The court case dropped just yesterday, if anyone didn't know about it. There's a lot of things you can look up for it. I'm not going to go over it here. I will post a link to it in the description on YouTube. And I've just got a couple of different things, different points to talk about. And I'm not going to talk about are they going to win, or who should win and which one's better. I'm not really going to go into that because there's plenty of people talking about that on the forums. Some of the things I do want to talk about is community. That's like my main focus here for us as a Hex community, and how it is that we're relating to the Magic community. So first up, Some different mixed reactions. We've seen a lot of these mixed reactions. Hex Hunter Mocog did a thing. We've seen a lot in the general discussion that you talking about like the different ramifications of this, and basically people getting angry and saying I'm never going to play Magic the Gathering again, or I'm going to basically boycott all Hasbro products and all this and that. And I really don't feel like that's the best way to go. Just getting angry about it, like that's not going to do a lot for you, and you know, you just basically maybe just lay off on like buying some Magic stuff for a little while, and you know, but that's really just not portraying a good image, I would say. Colin, anything to tag on to that before we move on to the next point?
No, I think that's. I mean, I feel like I'm sort of in the camp where I'm probably less inclined to buy anything for now. I mean, I think that I'm happy to change that position if things get worked out in a reasonably amicable way, and I think there's a good chance of that eventually.
There's literally no reason for you to like burn all your Magic cards or go into your like LGS and just like dump them off or do any of that. There's no reason to do that. So I would not advocate anyone do that right now.
Right.
So here's you can see on our website for the Hex Reddit subthread is basically all stuff about this. The Magic subthread went nuts for like the day one, but if you go over to the Magic subthread, you can see that they don't even talk about it anymore. The first thing that comes up about it was on page 2. Saw some stuff come through my Twitter feed. One person said that they stole Magic wholesale. I had to respond to that. I basically said, well, you should really try to play the game, and then basically they said trawl all back, and so I was like, all right, well, that's pretty much the end of that conversation. But yeah, I would say that if there's someone saying they stole it wholesale, well, I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but there are definite mechanics that are very similar in both, which of course goes into the whole argument conversation. Again, let's try to take the high road. Next thing I want to talk about is how it is that everyone is angry about when they read the document. There are things in the document that say, oh, they want to take all the Kickstarter money, and they want to make it so that Hex never does it again, or maybe they're trying to absorb the company or do this and the other thing. I'm going to tell you from experience, I've been divorced once, and I made the mistake of going in there without a lawyer to think, for some reason in my mind, I thought that, they would talk to me like I was a normal human being. That's not how it is. When a lawyer is working for somebody, they're trying to win by the largest margin possible. So I had my ex-wife asking for things like, oh, well, I don't want all this stuff in the house. I just want you to pay me a value of what I think it's worth, some arbitrary value. Or I don't want this. I just want to have, like, instead of actually coming in and get this stuff. I mean, it gets pretty hairy. And Colin actually has a lot of experience with this. We were talking before the show, so I'll let Colin talk about it now.
Yeah, actually, so my company has been is actually in the middle of a lawsuit for misappropriation of trade secrets and a patent infringement, actually. And like the first complaint from the company who said this is like it's the same stuff, right? It's all hyperbole. It's all like the strongest possible language, and a lot of it's not actually true. In fact, it's basically all not true, right? But that's basically how these things start, and then like you respond, and then they respond back, and over time it becomes a much closer sort of telling of the actual facts, and then
Right.
you eventually go through the actual process. But I mean, I can't imagine their end games actually to get everything they say they want to get right. I mean, I think that there's like most of these things, there's probably a very good chance that over time it'll get settled. I mean, I think that the bigger issue is that it's probably absolutely the worst possible time, right, for the
Sure.
Hex guys, right? So, but
yeah, it puts them in a really, really awkward situation to be minimizing it. I mean, it's a lot of in my mind, it's a lot of similarities. Like if you're gonna go buy a car and you want to get it for like $15,000 and it's marked for like 20. Well, what are you gonna do? You're gonna go in and ask for it for 10, and and you guys are gonna like work out a deal, and then eventually you're gonna keep getting closer and closer to that price. And that's what you really wanted to begin with. So I mean, it's very, very similar. when we're talking about this whole like litigation process and what goes on with lawyers and what actually is going to happen. So don't get mad at the lawyers; they're doing their job. And don't get mad about this whole document. I mean, you can get mad like when it all shakes out and like after the fact. If something really is bad at that point in time, then get mad. But there's no reason to get huff then right now. The next one is protecting intellectual property. So Magic or Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro has a right to protect their intellectual property, and they should. Everyone should protect their intellectual property, and because of a lot of the similarities between Hex and Magic, I can see that this is a very big deal. This is going to be, I predict, it's going to be a landmark case for card games in general. We've got a lot of different things that card games have argued about in the past, and I think this is going to be hopefully a good thing for the community in large, the whole card game community. So yeah, there's really, again, if Wizards of the Coast didn't challenge Hex, then that kind of falls into like a use it or lose it, as I understand. And so because of that, yeah, if they didn't challenge Cryptozoic, then that would be negligent on their part. So anything to add to that, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we talked about earlier, I mean, I think that the big thing for me is that it could be like chilling for game development in general if, Wizards or Hasbro wins, right? Because, like, I think that, the sorts of things that they were granted in their patent are really, really broad. And, it could cause problems for lots of game development in the future. So, I mean, I think that it's a reasonable thing for them to be doing. I just hope that the Hex / Cryptozoic folks can mount enough of a defense, and that the community in general gets a positive outcome, right? Which hopefully is that both Magic and Hex are around, and game developers don't feel like they're handcuffed by a really sort of restrictive set of rules.
Right. Saw some chatter in chat there. Just to let you guys know, I will ban without prejudice here during this discussion if people can't act like adults. So yeah, please act like adults. Otherwise, I might have to just shut off the whole chat, which I will do. So moving on to the future of card games in general, CCGs. Like we kind of touched on this, and again, I just want to hit on this again. It's really, really important that for all CCGs that we come down to knowing what elements of the first TCG are okay for us to copy, like 60 card decks, for instance, or stuff like that, which are in the claim. Like they're claiming that that's too similar, or 15 card sideboards, or different things, and what's not okay, like basically the actual images and the story and the plot line and stuff. Something else that was kind of interesting to me along this lines was that they claim the plot line, and obviously the plot line of Hex is very, very much different than Magic. They're saying they're very similar, and someone brought up in one of the things that I read that if you take the plot line as something more simple, like in Hex we have two champions that are dueling with monsters and spells until their life total goes to 0 or they run out of cards. That's pretty much the same plot line that you have in Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering. However, that may be too broad of a definition because there are a lot of other card games that are very similar plot lines, if that's where you want to go with that. Some of the other things in the future that I want to kind of talk about is like possibility of settlement. I think that would be the best thing for both parties personally. Obviously, we're going to see what happens. I think that would just be good for card players in general because that would restore faith in Wizards of the Coast. Not that they really need it necessarily, because I mean they're so large that they could basically just they can do this. This is very much reminds me of if you've seen the movie. What's it called? Speed Racer. There's a part where it is that Racer Motors gets sued for IP infringement, even though there probably isn't any, because you have the larger company trying to bully the smaller company, and that's going to turn some people off for sure. But yeah, I think that would be best if they could just come to a settlement, save everybody some money, press on, and then we can have our digital card game. And Magic's really just not going to go away. There's not a lot that you could do to muscle your way into the market. The most people I've ever seen playing other card games other than Magic was at Gen Con, and everywhere else, I mean, it's basically Magic or nothing. So, anything to add on to that, Hex Colin? I keep calling him.
No,
Hex
I mean,
Colin.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think so too. I mean, I think that we need to. I mean, what's most interesting to me is that, like, I think that that the complaint could have been, like, sort of more factual, and sort of, they could have spent a little more time being sort of, a bit more balanced, right? Because I think that, if you look at the very surface of it, and sort of just take the threshold article as your primer to, like, the two games, then you'd come out with the sort of complaint that we saw, right? I mean, I think that if they'd actually taken a look at Hex and sort of seen some of the things that we know about it, and all of the additional things that are going to be there, then there's definitely a lot of divergence, and I think that's what's important, right? It's there's room for both of those things in the world, and a lot of us would play both of them quite happily.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah. There are plenty of people that have the income to play both, and like I said, there are plenty of things that Hex does really well as a digital card game that you can't do with a physical card game, which you can do with Magic Online, to be honest. But there are plenty of things that a physical experience provides you, like shuffling cards, talking to someone, interacting with someone, being able to move more freely through the phases and not be so mechanical. Like, there are a lot of those things that you can do physically that really are not the same when you're doing them digitally. Another thing that this would be a win for the Magic community here is to see Magic actually update their client. A lot of the complaints are still talking about how it's a Windows 95 or 98 client that they're using for Magic Online. So that would be another big win for the Magic community. And I do believe that they are trying to push forward with some sort of new client. It's just not ready yet. So finally, what I want to talk about is what we should be doing as a community. So the first thing is that I would say, again, don't get angry at Magic players. That's a big one. We need to represent Hex in a positive light right now. It's more important than ever to be a positive community. If we get out there and we're negative and we say, oh, it becomes a Sega versus Nintendo battle, or I guess these days, you younger kids probably are talking about PlayStation versus Xbox and that type of thing. You get into these lunchroom debates and there's really no winning side. You're like, oh, well, Sega is better because, Sonic the Hedgehog, and, they have better graphics and they can run faster, and, they're running on 16 bits, and, like, people get in these, like, silly arguments. I think that there's definitely room in that argument to say Sega had some pretty good games, and Super Nintendo also had some pretty good games. Same thing, these days. I guess we've got PlayStation and Xbox, right? Same thing. I think that we can definitely agree on that. Both Hex is going to be a good game once it's finally released, and Magic the Gathering is always going to be a good game, no matter what the company does. That game is always going to be good. It has a lot of depth to it. It's not going away. So, Colin, anything to add on to that?
No, I just concur that I think that we just need to not be negative, right? And at the end of the day, it's not Magic players, against Hex players, right? It's a corporation doing what corporations do, and it'll get resolved at some point, right? I mean, clearly things could go really badly for Hex people, right? But like, we can't. At the end of the day, we've got zero control over that, right? We just have to hope that things fall out in a fair way, and that it gets sorted out the way that we want it to. So, and no amount of berating Magic players or sort of trying to assert Hex's dominance will get us there any faster, or have any real
positive
effect on the end result.
Right. Exactly. So this is a Shin'hare deck that I had Irish Batusi send to me. Moving on to the deck doctrine segment. Of all that serious stuff, and we've got he's doing a lot of sack effects in here. We've got the typical Shin'hare shell. He's not running the Lord type characters. He also has a main deck Nature's Reigns, which is kind of interesting to me. He's running Oakhenge in here as well. I'm not sure what he's searching for with this, though. I mean, if he's searching for a specific combo or what. So we'll go ahead and just start in on this. So we're going to go look at some of the Wild and Blood cards to begin with. Alright, so I have actually tried to... I've considered trying to run Extinction in a deck like this. I'm going to click on PvP, and then we'll narrow it down by colors, and that will help us. If you guys haven't used the Hex CCG browser website, I suggest you do. I really appreciate when people decide to do send me decks that they use the Hex CCG browser. However, if you just send me a screenshot of your deck, I can go ahead and input it in there. It'd take me about 5 or 10 minutes. Not really a big deal. Okay, he's running the 3 Murders. Curse of... I'm just trying to basically find cards that we want to throw in the deck first. Shin'hare are going to get some love pretty soon, though. Is what the Hex CCG Pro guys said after they visited Cryptozoic in Set 2. Colin has seen some Set 2 cards, although he can't really talk to us about it too much.
I actually, I saw the latest art for a new Shin'hare Lord from Set 2, and it's unbelievable. Like, some of the new art is just really incredible.
So we need like expendable troops. This Ritualist is actually really good. Alright. With the other effects. I mean, you have to have the other effects going on with your deck, so there is that stipulation there, but Command Tower is another one that I don't know, I feel like I kind of want to run in here.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of having like another win condition. It seems like the deck at the moment has, Zentoth as like, a one-of as a win condition, but like, I've always had good success with like, a couple of Onslaught, for instance, where, like even if your main, like your Blood Cauldron Ritualist just eating people and hitting for big damage, doesn't work out for you, you can suddenly have, 10, 3, 4 crushing troops that can finish off the game for you.
Right, yeah, and I even tried doing going the route into Diamond to pick up, what was it, the effect that basically can buff all the battle hoppers.
Oath of Valor.
Yeah, and that was fun for a while. The big problem is that it doesn't say name a card. Do you know if they're going to try to fix that in the future, Colin, by any chance? It should say name a card. It shouldn't say...
No, yeah. I mean, I don't know whether or not that's a consequence of the tech behind the scenes, or whether or not that was the intention, that you had to get one into play before you could use it.
With it.
So, right, yeah. So, I mean, I think that we for now we should assume that that's the way they want it, where you have to have played one, which means that it actually works really well for battle hoppers, right? Because on turn 3 you get your first charge power, you pop out a hopper, then you cast Oath of Valor, and then it's set for the rest of the game. So, and actually I've been just like trying to play around with like decks that use Oath of Valor, like with Wild, like with like Briar Legions and Briar Patch Conjurers and maybe even Pack Raptors, right? Anywhere where you can guarantee yourself, or at least you can get yourself the chance of having more than 4 of a troop, where Oath of Valor, like that's clearly where it really shines.
Right. Yeah, actually, a funny thing also, I had somebody that actually turned one of their battle hoppers into an angel. In a draft. I have that actually recorded in my latest draft. That was pretty interesting. Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, you got to really look at battle hoppers as resources until you can at least make them 1/1s, and Command Tower does that for us. It's not the most efficient way to do it, but
yeah, and sometimes it depends on whether or not you feel like that's more efficient than a well-timed evolve, right? So
right.
Which has the advantage of pumping up the back end too.
Colin, I've said for quite some time that Shin'hare need to get a resource dork. Is there any chance of that, you think, at all in the horizon? Any chance?
Yeah, I think there's a reasonable chance of that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that wouldn't be overpowered at all. If they actually got a resource dork, basically a guy that basically comes into play and gives you like a temporary resource when you activate him, type of thing. All right, so moved the what's it called? Nature's Reigns into the reserves. Of course, the reserves isn't updating right now. Let's see. I'm just going to normalize my shards just so I can see that more easily. Just make it 10 and 10. So I know that I have 24 shards, so I can see what my deck total really is. And I'll figure out that shard curve later. So I've considered running Bone Warrior in here. A lot of things with double threshold are going to be pretty prohibitive. He's running Monika Shin, which is probably the best champion to run with this deck. We could also run some of the other classic champions. Let me just turn this stuff off and turn on champions. Where is champions type? So other cards you could try to run. You could try to run Bun'Jitsu, I guess, because this guy, we might actually run this guy. Guy might be better for us now that he's fixed. He's cheaper. He combines all those battle hoppers. We're turning out a lot of battle hoppers. What else could we run in here?
Zared.
Yeah, Zared is, of course, really amazing removal. We've seen him used a lot. He does actually -1 to the back end. So that picture isn't updated. I think the text is, though. Yeah, the text gets updated. Sometimes the pictures don't. Kizimoto, I don't really... He's okay for like a one-shot. He's more for like aggressive decks because they have like some sort of speed on their troops, where it is they come into play and they attack the turn they come into play. I don't think he's really amazing for this deck because a lot of times you're going to be sitting on board states building up your army and then you're going to want to swing all at once. Lionel Flynn, no, that's not in the color. Yeah, so what we might do is I think we'll go with Bun'Jitsu on this one instead of Monika Shin. I don't know if I did. No, I got to take Monika off first. Is that the way they say it in the office? I've always said Monika Shin. I haven't got to go to the Cryptozoic offices yet. So the Threshold podcast got to go to the office, their Cryptozoic office, so we should see something from them pretty soon.
Yeah, they recorded a pretty lengthy podcast with Corey.
Oh wow!
While I was there on Wednesday, so yeah.
Right. Yeah. As a side note, on the trial, they're actually using some of the one of the Threshold podcast episodes where it teaches you how to play Hex, and it refers to magic a lot as evidence for the case. So that's got to feel pretty bad. I'm actually, I don't know that I would take it well if they took one of my deck building with the Squire episodes and they're like, yeah, you see magic all over this episode. Deck building with the Squire, we got to go get this guy. You show up at my door. I'm like, I'm just a guy.
Right, and I mean, I think that the other thing is, right, like it's pretty easy to point out the superficial, like, similarities, right, and
right.
I think there's lots of stuff we don't know about, like, like how it's really going to be different in like the main modes of play, right, and so I think that from what people have seen, right, then it's probably a reasonable conclusion to draw, but I think that as time goes on, it'll be more and more, that's not it, and I actually. Not to talk about this too much, right? But I worry that, like, what Wizards is actually doing is using it as, a way to get information, right, from Cryptozoic, right? Because one of the things you have to do as part of these things is, you'll make a request for discovery, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so there's clearly a lot that the Hex folks have to risk when they share their future plans for the game, right? So
right. Or any of the documents that basically I was told that, like, if any of the documents refer to magic at all or any of their documentation, then they basically are going to lose that. There's like 3 different parts to the case. That will be a big loser point of the case where they'll have to concede something.
Right.
So you can tell when you talk to people from Cryptozoic that they're very tight-lipped about making sure that anytime you talk about magic, they don't talk about it. Alright, so Bucktooth Commander. I want this Bucktooth Commander, but I'm not sure. Because he's the double threshold. We're kind of more in blood, especially with Bun'Jitsu. I don't know that we necessarily need him. We don't have a ton of real production. We've got this Concubunny, I guess. But I don't know that we necessarily want to go this route. I think we'll get rid of the Concubunny, Ritualist, and the Bucktooth Commanders. We'll see what that does for us. We'll see what that looks like. I like having Sensei, because he's just another good body to have to sack if we need it. I kind of want to make sure we're maximizing Wretched Blood. The big thing with Wretched Blood is just putting those battle hoppers into play. As long as you've got Bloodbearer and some sort of sack outlet, you're in pretty good shape because you can just sack those battle hoppers and then pump up your Eulogist or other things. So we want to run a lot of decent sack outlets like Hop Hero. The Eulogist uses the sack outlet, but Blood Cauldron Ritualist also uses it. So those are 2 sack outlets. Plus we've got Necessary Sacrifice. Takes advantage of it by giving us gas late in the game. We can reduce our resources by 1 here. So we have 2 cards to get rid of here. Our curve looks okay. We've got the 1 onslaught at the very top of the curve, but it kind of does win the game by itself. So, yeah, I think we'll keep that in. We could probably go down on Command Tower, maybe. Here, I have to look at the curve. Let's actually do a deck analysis. We've got a ton of blood shards. We're really heavy into blood, so probably if we cut cards, it'll probably be a blood card here. Or we could come completely out of wild and maybe just go blood. Maybe we should do that. I think I want to do that. Let's just come out of wild and just go straight up blood. What do you think, Colin? I mean, we're gonna have to...
possibly. Yeah. I mean, it might be. I mean, so if you're just looking for 1 card, though, it might be worthwhile just taking out one of the Hop Heroes, right? Because he's unique anyway. So threes on the border, like how many you need.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Let's put the Command Tower. We can buff that up to 4. Let's see what this looks like. So, yeah. Oh, I need to put 20. We need to get rid of actually Shards of Fate. Put like 23 shards in here as well. 23. Let's see what our... So we got 5 cards that fill in if we go this route. I mean, it could be pretty interesting. We can actually like play with like more Necessary Sacrifice this way. We could probably play with a playset of them. And maybe some more Wretched Blood. And I think that's a good suggestion there on the Hop Hero. I mean, you got to try it. He is very vulnerable to a lot of things, so maybe playing 4 isn't too bad, but obviously if you're looking at 4 in your opening hand, it's going to be a pretty bad feeling.
Right.
So doing that, now I can play with Command Towers. I think that gets a lot better for us, and we could even play with things in our reserves. And again, we still don't have reserves on casual games where you best of 3. Which would be nice to have. But Extinction is another card you could throw in your sideboard in your reserves there. Let's see, what else? Life Siphon's another one. Pact of Pain. It's another one we could use to like gas, get some gas. Terrible Transfer is probably also another one we could run in here.
And maybe a couple Life Siphons is an alternate win condition.
Yeah. You could even run like with this. You could even run like Vampire King. Of course, he is pretty big. I mean, he is legendary, so you might have a hard time getting a hold of him. But our 4-point range, I mean, could use some help. I need to just turn on blood cards. Okay, what are we doing? Let's see, color, blood. Corrupt Harvester. There's really just not a lot. I mean, when we get our set 2, there's going to be a lot more options when we're looking at decks and building decks and things. It's going to be an exciting time when that happens.
Yeah, especially for the tribal stuff. Like, they're definitely filled out to the point where you can legitimately, go after Shin'hare or humans, and and probably mostly stay in the same shard if you want to.
The Boltpaw Wizard is also another underplayed card, which should probably be in here, just because it has a lot of utility. It's going to allow us to revert troops, and I mean, you're probably never going to use it to bury cards off your opponent's deck. Although there could be some sort of combo here where maybe when you sacrifice a troop, if it gave you a resource, that would be 1 resource, and as long as you could keep making troops somehow, you could eventually mill your opponent out. That's a lot of work though, so not very likely, but the reverted troop is pretty valuable, especially against wild decks, and you could run 2 more in your reserves as something to side in against those decks specifically.
Yeah, and I still think that reversion's probably the most underplayed mechanic at the moment, just because people just really don't know how to deal with it at the moment. Like, I had a guy like last night who got Jadim on turn 4 3 times against me, but once like he had pumped him up to like 11-11 and sent him over, and I reverted him and single blocked him, and I don't think he knew what to say, right? So and and. So I think that that people aren't valuing revert enough, and I think Boltpaw is going to be one of the key places you get it, especially because you're not limited on the number of uses in his case.
Right, right, for sure. Yeah, I mean when it's reusable like that, like I think that the diamond one could have cantripped, and when I say cantrip, it means it draws a card. I think that could have easily cantripped and not have been overpowered, but maybe they just felt like that would have been a little bit too much for the diamond version of the card. Inquisition's another great card that can go in this deck. It's going to snipe a lot of things out of your opponent's hands. You're probably going to want to run some in your reserves as well.
Right, get rid of their board clears and stuff, their extinctions, and their what's the 2-cost red card that gets rid of Heatwave. So because those
right. Yeah, you got to snipe that.
Yeah, those are the things that Shin'hare are really susceptible to.
So the reason why I got rid of Life Siphon is because it doesn't affect board states, but it could be good, like especially if you're running against different some of the other decks that are out there. I'm gonna get rid of Terrible Transfer. It's just a little bit expensive for removal, and I think this is decent. Our curve looks a lot better. I like our curve. Our 2-point range is pretty heavy, so you might try to get rid of some stuff in there, but the 2-point cards we have are pretty solid. Like you got your Wretched Brood, your Eulogist, so you might even try to go down a resource and get a little bit more risky with this deck. You also have the Inquisition is a great 2-point card, which I would run 2 more on the reserves. But I feel like you could play this deck, and it may be like a tier 2.5 maybe deck. Your Ritualist gets decently big off of a lot of this stuff. Your command tower is going to give you a lot of good front end. But yeah, a lot of the sweeps are going to be a big problem for you. And again, because we don't have any type of reserves and it's not best of 3, we can't side in Inquisition to see what games 2 and 3 look like. That's really what you want to see sometimes, because that like game 1 in a lot of situations may not be very favorable for you. Game 1 is pretty important though as well. I do like running a ton of necessary sacrifice, even though it is kind of like a buff where we kind of need to have troops in play, and Bun'Jitsu doesn't do that for us, so it's kind of risky to run this many. Maybe we'll run one less of those. Yeah, not too much else to talk about here. Yeah, we actually kind of finished pretty quickly. I thought that the Hex versus Magic the Gathering thing was going to take longer to talk about. But I actually, this deck shaped up a lot better than I thought it was going to. So I think we're pretty well done. What do you think, Colin? I keep trying to call you Hex Colin.
I know. I think actually, you know what? I was talking to the Cryptozoic guys about that the other night. Because at the beginning, like I just happened to put that in front of my name because it wasn't available on the boards,
right.
And now they've all taken to putting Hex in front of their names, and I didn't want there to be any confusion.
Right.
So, but they seem to be fine with it. So.
Oh yeah. All right. So, do you want to talk about your plug your stuff one more time for us and talk about your PvP team, or are you looking for anything in particular from the community, or do you do any streaming? You don't do any streaming, right?
I'm going to start. I think
right.
that now I didn't. I mean, it'd been a long time. So I used to play Magic a lot, but it had been like 10 years since I'd played any reasonable amount of it, and so I didn't want to be in the position. I was a bit worried that when I started drafting, I would embarrass myself.
Hey, I embarrassed
to be
myself
perfectly
this
honest.
last draft. Oh my gosh, I didn't socket cards in the last draft. That's embarrassing.
But now I feel like I've gotten my win percentage up, or at least my sort of average placing is sort of trending towards about second probably.
Right.
So now I'm feeling like I might actually have some idea what I'm doing again. So I'll probably start doing a bit of streaming, and then apart from that, I think that with the team and whatnot, then sort of around Gen Cons when that'll all sort of start to heat up. So.
All right, so I'll make sure to post information about Hex on the YouTube. So definitely look below for that stuff in the comments section, so you can get with him. I'll also be posting the information about the lawsuit between Cryptozoic, or not Cryptozoic, Hex LLC and Hasbro / Wizards of the Coast. So you can look for that. Again, the bouncing ball graphic, that's a thing for hobby game dev. So if you guys are interested in doing game development, I would definitely hit that up. It's Chris DeLeon. You know, some really good courseware with that. And yeah, that's pretty much all we had tonight. So just to review, tonight we talked with Hex Colin, one of the pillars of the Hex community, one of our 14 producers. And we went over some of the patch notes, which were pretty minor. Then we talked about the lawsuit between Hex LLC and Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro Incorporated. And then we did this deck doctor with this wonderful blood deck for the Shin'hare, and that's pretty much what we did tonight. So this is Aaron Squire signing off, saying God bless you and your families. Try not to rage too much out there.